Perfect. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2020 ASU Data Conference again. I'm sure you've all been here a couple days already and got a couple more, so in for a good time. And my name is Danny, and I'll be hosting and moderating today. And thanks for coming to the Student Profile Data presentation hosted by Jennifer Hornsby. She's the Director of Registrar Services, and she just hit the milestone of 25 years, so let's congratulate her on that. That's pretty awesome. With that, I think we'll turn it over to Jennifer, if you're all set.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming to look at the student profile data with me this morning. I recognize some of your names, so I think a few of you are familiar with this table and this data, but this presentation is basically a very introductory high-level view of the data that we use in what we call the student profile tables. These tables are used primarily for enrollment tracking, enrollment reporting. One of the most common reports is my Zoom background right now. It is a report that is available on the analytics site in the enrollment tracking page. The data on this report comes from the student profile tables and is one of the primary reasons why the student profile table was developed. In 2007, when ASU implemented PeopleSoft, we also got a new data warehouse. I'm not sure how many of you were here at the time, but we got a lot of data, and all of it was effective dated, which is wonderful. We're swimming in data, and we have a lot of, because it's effective dated, we have a lot of history that we can use for reporting. But we quickly realized that all of that data meant we had to do a little bit more work for reporting to pull the right records. And so we developed the student profile table in 2009, 2010, with input from several others at the university, some from UTO, who had been designers and developers of the previous student profile in the legacy data warehouse. And also with a lot of input from Nancy Dixon, who was in institutional analysis at the time and an expert in data, our ASU's data warehouse at the time. The student profile tables run from data that is in PeopleSoft, which is the student transactional system. It's the system of record for class registration, grades, transcripts, graduation, and diplomas. And so the only data that's in the table is what is available in PeopleSoft, but it is the primary source that we use for enrollment tracking. The student profile tables, and there's more than one, I'll get to them, I'll get to the table names in a minute, are where we go to get enrollment status. So enrollment means registration in classes. It also is where we get our term statistics, which is GPA, credit hours, a lot of different versions of credit hours. It is the only place in PeopleSoft where we calculate new, returning, and continuing, which is used to identify first-year students and new transfers in the days leading up to the 21st day before institutional analysis actually finalizes that cohort. The new, returning, continuing status isn't something that is stored anywhere else in PeopleSoft, so we calculate it on the fly in PeopleSoft with a batch process. This is also the table where we identify the student's major, their college, and their campus. We know that students can have multiple majors. They can also have minors and certificates. They can be active in multiple careers at a time. And so we pull all of that into student profile, and then we added some primary record flags to the student profile. So users can either get one record per student if that's all they want, the primary major, Or if you need all of the other detail, like minors and certificates that are attached to students, you can also get that as well. The primary record flags let it be flexible that way. And finally, I'll quickly cover the snapshots that we have available, which are how we do term comparison point in time reporting. So that's basically the agenda for the next 45 minutes. I'll go through this pretty quickly, but please feel free to ask questions as I go, and I will save time at the end for questions and discussion. So first, basically the student profile tables. These are processes that run in PeopleSoft every night. This data is generated and stored in tables in PeopleSoft and then moved to data warehouse and then snapshot. The student profile tables simplify reporting for majors, and in PeopleSoft, those are programs, plans, and subplans. It's also their campus and their catalog year. The student profile tables store the student's enrollment status. We can get to who is enrolled, who's dropped, who's withdrawn. We also calculate whether they're state reported or not, also known as state funded. This table easily stores their residency status, so whether they're paying in-state or out-of-state tuition each term. One of the more complicated pieces in these tables is the new returning and continuing status, as well as the calculation for first-year student and new transfer. That's been very complicated, and we've had to adjust it a few times over the years, but I'll go over that in detail in a few minutes. These tables store the term statistics. Again, that is the GPA, the term GPA, the cumulative GPA, as well as the credit hours, their total, their ASU hours, their transfer hours, their test credit hours. The table stores their academic level, which is freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and their academic standing, which is probation, disqualified, academic warning. And finally, you can use this table to identify who has applied to graduate and if they've graduated. So I'm displaying on my presentation the names of the tables. The first one is the student profile major by term, and the table name is the name that has the underscores in it. The student profile major by term table has term-based data, including whether the student is registered or not, or as I was saying, their academic level or their other term statistics that aggregate by term. They're all in one table, and this table not only contains their major and their enrollment status, but one thing to keep in mind is students can have multiple statuses in a term. As I was saying, they can have multiple careers. They can be an undergrad and a grad at the same time. They can be grad and law at the same time, and they can be enrolled in one and not the other. Of course, their major could be different for one career and not the for one career versus another. So this table does have multiples per student per term, and that is what the primary record flags are for in that table. If you want to collapse it and easily get one record per student, you can. The other thing to keep in mind about this table is everything that is not already directly tied to the term, like their enrollment status or their academic standing, is effective dated. And in the case of effective dating, we use the term start date to identify which record was effective as of that term. And I have some examples in a few slides to display what I mean by that. So again, it's either natively tied to the term because of the transaction, their enrollment status in that term, or we use the effective dates as of the term start date to pull an effective dated record that was effective for that term. The next table is the student profile by term, and this table does not have major in it. It has all of the data that is term-based, and naturally there's only one value per student per term. Some examples of that are academic standing. Like I was saying, probation status is in this table. Even if a student has multiple majors in multiple colleges, they are either on probation or they're not. They can't be on probation for one major and not the other, for example. So any data that is either true or not for that term is stored in this table, and there aren't any multiples. There's no primary record flags in this table. This table also has the honors student flag and the athlete flag. And last is a newer table. We've had it now for about 5 years, and it's the student major current. It has no term-based data in it at all. It is, as of today's date, what is their major. It only includes students that are active as of today. Since it doesn't have any term-based data, it doesn't have enrollment status or academic level or any of those other things that change from one term to the next. But it is easy to use when you need a student's current major for currently active students. And these three tables, like I was saying, they run in PeopleSoft every night, and then they're moved to Data Warehouse. Okay, so now I'm going to go over some of the details of student profile major by term. The first thing is this table only contains records for students who are term activated in that term. Term activation is important for enrollment. A student can't register for classes unless they are term activated. We often refer to active students. Most of the time we mean they're term activated in whatever term we're looking at. We use term activation to enforce the continuous enrollment policies or the quick reentry policies that determine if a student can continue enrolling or if they need to be admitted again. So term activation is very important here, and until a student is term activated, they don't exist in this table. I already was explaining about how the data in this table is either natively tied to the term in PeopleSoft, like a class registration transaction is always tied to a term. That's the way the system works. Or if it's not a term-based record, then we use effective dating to pick what record belongs to each term. Also, this table only contains values for undergraduates, graduates, and law, not the non-credit career, which is Global Launch, formerly known as the American Language and Culture Program. I can get into why later, but one of the main reasons is when we are reporting institutionally and outside the institution, we don't include non-accredited enrollment in any of those reporting. So it wasn't needed in this table for the main purpose, which was enrollment tracking. But another reason is because they have very different policies and procedures than the accredited side of ASU. And so, to be honest, it was easier to not include them in this table than to try to account for all the different policies and rules that their records go through. The table went live in 2010, and it contains records back to spring of 2005. So right now you can get 15 years of data from this table. Here's an example of one student's record for the fall. This is all of the fields in the student profile major by term table for an individual student in the order that they're listed in the table. I know many people don't look at records this way, but this is the information in the table. I'm going to back up now and talk about term activation. Again, students only exist in this table if they've been term activated for that term. So a student who is admitted for fall of 2021 does not exist in this table yet because we haven't term activated for fall of 2021. But a student who was term activated for fall of 2020 will have a record for fall of 2020. Also, a student who's admitted for spring of 2021 will have a record for that term, but not for fall of 2020. I hope that makes sense. So just some background about what is required to be term activated. I was explaining that this term activation is required in order for a student to be able to register for classes. So you probably know that to register for classes, students either have to be admitted for that term or they have to have been admitted in the past and continuing and meet the continuous enrollment requirements. We enforce that by running discontinuation processes every 21st day to enforce those rules for continuous enrollment. So as long as the student's program plan stack is active as of the term start and their admit term is for that term or for an earlier term, then they get term activated. A lot of students are term activated and never enroll in any term, or they might not enroll in an individual term. But if they're not term activated in that term, they don't exist in the table. All right, I highlighted some of the fields related to enrollment status. The one I like the best is the ASU enrollment status. E means they are enrolled in that term. This is the same example I was displaying a few seconds ago. This is fall 2020. Up in the top left, the S term code is 2207, and that code represents fall 2020. So the highlighted field that says ASU enroll stat E, E means enrolled. That means this person is enrolled in classes now and has not dropped or withdrawn. If they withdrew, that value would be a W, and withdrawal in this table means they have at least one course with a W grade and no courses that they're still enrolled and not dropped in. If the value is a D, that means they were registered, but they dropped and they have no W grades. And an N means they never registered for classes in this term. This field right here is the easiest to use to identify who is registered for classes right now in a term. And with the other values of W or D, you could easily include students who were registered and withdrew or dropped based on whatever your needs are. Some of the related fields are the academic load. F means full-time, H is half-time. That's based on the institutional rules that are in PeopleSoft. We also have a count of how many classes they are still enrolled in. ASU E class count means they are enrolled and not dropped. The units taken for progress is a sum of how many units they're enrolled in. And then if they had signed up to audit any classes, that number would not be a 0. So basically, those are most of the fields related to the enrollment status, but the easiest one is the ASU enrollment status of E. Here's just a sample of the same fields from a few fall 2020 students. The first column shows the enrollment status codes that I was just describing. We also record the first date the student registered in any class. Students often register for one class, add another one, then they might drop one of them, add another one. And they do that for months before the semester starts. But sometimes it's important to know when the student first registered for anything. If they're withdrawn, then they will have a withdrawal date. Unless it's a medical or compassionate withdrawal, we don't post the withdrawal dates until after the end of the term, because once we post the withdrawals, the student can't re-enroll for session B, for example. And so that's a process that never happens until after the term is over, which is why most of the students you'll see that have withdrawn will not have a withdrawal date until the term is well over. Okay. Here is another list that is just enrollment data from an individual student over many terms. So the S term codes on the left indicate what term each row is for. 2154 is summer of 2015, and 2201 is spring of 2020. So these are in chronological order. You can see the student never registered for the summer of 2015. They are enrolled still. They haven't dropped or withdrawn from fall of 2015, and we have their first registered date. I'm gonna skip ahead now to summer of 2018. They registered in April and they completely withdrew in July. And we would have posted the withdrawal date at the end of the term, probably in August or September. You have, for each term, you have their class count and how many units they took. Now I'll look at what we call the term statistics. These are the credit hours and GPA values. This is the same student as before. I'm going to use the same student as we go through and just highlight different groupings of fields. So the term statistics are statistics that aggregate by term. All of the fields that start with UNT are for that term. So we're looking at fall of 2020. Those values refer to the units in fall of 2020. All of the fields that begin with TOT are for total, and those are the aggregated units from prior terms up through the current term. So total cumulative 113 means this student has earned 113 credit hours so far. This student has grades already for fall, probably session A. So this student already has a CUR GPA, that's their fall 2020 GPA so far. That will continue to change as grades are posted for the fall. They have 17 credit hours this semester, and the unit taken GPA of a 3 means that one grade is posted for 3 credit hours. Or I guess it could be, it's possible it's not one course for 3 credit hours, but that's likely. Their cum GPA, of course, is an aggregate GPA, so that includes the current term and all of the prior terms. Are there any questions so far? Okay. Here are term statistics for about 25 fall 2020 students, just seeing the variations that students can have for all of these terms. Again, I included the enrollment status so you can see what it looks like when they never enrolled. The N's mean they never registered for the term. The E means they're still enrolled. I'll also jump down towards the bottom, 5 from the bottom. There's a row for a student who has had their term statistics reset. This student's term statistics were reset in the summer of 2018. That usually happens when they get a bachelor's degree and return as a post-bac undergrad. It can also happen if they do an academic renewal. So in the system, we can actually reset all of their statistics back to 0. That means their GPA and their credit hours are 0, and they start over again with the possibility of getting a 4.0 GPA. It means none of the grades from before that are included in the current calculation.
Jennifer?
Yes.
We do have one question in the chat here from Paul. He just wanted to be sure that he heard correctly. The CUR GPA is term GPA, and cum GPA is GPA regardless of term. Yeah, so the current GPA, the term GPA, and the cum GPA is the GPA regardless of term. So.
My internet is coming in and out, so I think I heard most of the question. And I'm trying to get back to the slide. The courses and grades in that particular individual term. So when we're looking at fall 2020, it is based on the courses and grades earned so far for fall of 2020 only. None of the prior terms are included. The cumulative GPA is ASU grades for all prior terms up through fall of 2020. And again, what courses, what grades have been posted so far.
Kind of lost you a little bit there. I don't know if you could repeat that, please.
Yes, I'm happy to. The current GPA is only courses and grades for that particular individual term. So for fall 2020, it will only ever include ASU grades in fall of 2020. And as grades are posted, that will continue to change. The cumulative GPA includes ASU grades from prior terms. It does aggregate term by term, and will continue to change for fall 2020 as their grades come in. But if a student got all A's last spring, let's say spring was their first semester, they got all A's, their cumulative GPA for last spring would be a 4.0. If they got a B so far for this semester, then their cumulative GPA for fall is no longer a 4.0. Depending on how many credit hours, it would be a 3 point something. But when you look at a student's transcript from any institution, they will always have a cum GPA at the end of every term, and you'll see how it aggregates per term. I have an example on the next slide, I think. No, I don't, that shows a student aggregating over term, but here, this is one student who's, you can see how their cumulative GPA is aggregating by term. So their current cumulative GPA is a 3.69, and it hasn't changed since they were enrolled in the spring of 2020. They don't have any grades yet for the fall of 2020, so it's still a 3.69 right now. But as grades come in for the 10 credit hours that they're enrolled in, you'll see the fall 2020 and spring 2021 GPA change.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome. In this example, you can also see how the total cumulative hours aggregated. And then when we reset their cumulative stats, the student obviously graduated because they went from a senior to a post-bac undergrad. You see the term, the stats were reset is 2194. That means summer of 2019. And beginning on that term, all of the values are 0. And they never enrolled that semester. So in fall, you can see how it started aggregating again from 0.
We do have a bit of a follow-up here also from Emily. She's wondering if you go back to a past term and look at the current GPA, will that have changed if the student retakes one of those classes for a better grade later? Is it better to use a census table for that?
Yes, the current GPA will always be will always update every time a grade is changed, or if the student repeats a class for grade improvement and the lower grade is removed from the GPA, the current GPA will change. You can use census. Institutional analysis captures a census snapshot after grades are posted. I think it's usually 3 or 4 weeks after grades are posted. In student profile snapshots, we also capture an end of term snapshot, which is taken the day after grades are due. If you look at the academic calendar, the day after grades are due, we run a process that we call repeat processing, where we recalculate, we remove grades that were repeated. It's really fun. It takes all day. It's a really good time. And that recalculates their GPA, their cumulative GPA for the current term, but also for the prior term where the lower grade was earned. That evening, we run academic standing, which is probation and disqualification. So we have to wait for grades to be posted. Then we run repeat processing, and then we run academic standing. And that night, we take a snapshot of student profile. When I get to the snapshots, I'll tell you more about it, but it's an end of term snapshot. The code is EOT. So that's taken that very first night. But the census graded table is taken usually 3 or 4 weeks later. So depending on what you need, you can use one or the other.
Great. Thank
but
you.
grades are always changing all the time. 10 years back, 20 years back. It's a lot more common, of course, for grades to change for the last 2 or 3 years, but they do change all the time for prior semesters. Okay. All right, now favorite, the NRC. NRC is new, returning, continuing. And for new undergrads, we also calculate whether they're a first-year student, a new transfer, or a new non-degree. And we use this for enrollment tracking purposes. First, I'll talk about a first-year student. A first-year student is someone who's new, who's never attended ASU in a degree program before in a fall or spring semester, and they're not non-degree or a visiting scholar. And either their high school diploma is the same year or they earned less than 12 credit hours after their high school diploma. So for example, students that are graduating from high school this year and starting at ASU next summer or fall will all be considered first-year students next fall. If they're new in the summer and they enroll, they're still new again in the fall. And that's everyone who's graduating from high school this spring will be a first-year student next fall. Everyone who's new and in a degree-seeking program and they either didn't graduate from high school this year or they earned, I'm sorry, I always say this backwards. If they didn't graduate from high school this fall and they earned more than 12 credit hours after their high school diploma, then they're a new transfer. Anyone who graduated from high school before this fall, but they didn't earn 12 credit hours after high school is still a new first-year student. So we do have some first-year students who are in their 30s and 40s because they didn't go anywhere else to college after high school. So I had said to be a first-year student, you have to be new. You have to have never been here before in a fall or spring semester. We call this NRC, and it stands for new, returning, and continuing. Returning means the student was here before, but they weren't here last term. So they skipped at least one term. Now for undergraduates, our quick reentry policy lets them sit out for up to 7 terms before they have to be readmitted. So we have a very large pool of students who could return even without applying for readmission. And we classify all of them as returning as long as they're here in the same degree level as before. And continuing means they were here in the last fall or spring term. So students that are here in the fall and registering for next spring, they're continuing. And students that were here last spring and they're registered for fall are also continuing. When we look to see, we use their prior enrollment status to determine if they were here before. Enrollment includes whether they withdrew. So even if a student withdrew from the fall, if they register for the spring, they're still considered continuing. We only look at fall or spring terms because at ASU, summer is not required to be enrolled for continuous enrollment policies. And again, all of this goes back to whether they have to apply for admission again before they can continue enrollment. So these calculations are following those policies. We also only look at state-funded enrollment. And I don't think we have time to get into state-funded right now, but there are fields in student profile that indicate if the enrollment is state-funded. The enrollment has to have been at the same education level, so that if they're a bachelor's degree student in the fall, then we look at, are they a bachelor's degree student in the spring? If they were non-degree before and now they're a bachelor's student, then they're new because they weren't in a bachelor's program before. It's the same for the graduate level programs. We look at master's, doctoral, and JD to determine if it's the same level. We also take, over the years, ASU has had several different programs where we have had large groups of visiting scholars and exchange students. We don't have that many this year, unfortunately, but in prior years, we have had hundreds or more of students in this category, and they are never planning to graduate from ASU. They're usually here for one term or 1 year at the most. And so we exclude them from these calculations because they are not going to be included in any retention calculations or the 4 or 6 year graduation rates, because we know from the beginning that they're not planning to graduate from ASU. So all the fields that get at these records that I'm displaying here, enrolled, state-funded, education level, and visiting scholar, are all in the student profile table. And when I get to the next screenshot of that student we've been looking at, I'll show you where they are. This is a diagram of how we calculate new NRC. So we look at, we identify first, what is the student's primary record for this semester? We only calculate NRC on their primary record. Then we determine if they've been enrolled in a previous term. If so, we check the education level. Is it the same this term and the prior term? Then we check if they were a visiting scholar before and now they're not, or vice versa. And then we check if the enrollment in the prior term was state funded. If it is, then we check if they skipped a term. If their prior term was the last term ASU offered, and if so, then they're continuing. If not, then they're returning. And then if not, then they're new. I went through that really fast, but are there any questions about that? Okay. So I had said all the fields are in the student profile table. One of them is in the one we haven't looked at yet, but most of them are right here. The enrollment status. The enrollment status of E means that's the field that we look at in the prior term to see if they were enrolled. Over in their major data, we have their education level and then a description of the code. So a 13 means a bachelor's degree. I believe, see, I used to have these memorized. I think 15 is a Juris Doctor, 17 is a master's, and 21, I probably have those backwards. Anyway, the table has the description, so you can look it up. I don't have to memorize it. So all of those fields are what we use to determine if the student is new, returning, or continuing. And then for new undergrads, we also identify if they're a first-year student or a transfer. Now I'm going to move on to all of the major related fields, and there's a lot of them. Again, the major in this table is the major that was effective as of the term start. We use the effective date and the term start date to pick that record. And there are a lot of fields related to the student's major. The first is the ACAD Prague and ACAD plan at the top left. Above that is the career number, which is very important when a student has concurrent degrees or multiple majors, or however you want to phrase it, they will have multiple career numbers for each major. And those become important when we're calculating the primary record flags.
You have one question there too that came in a minute ago from Diana. She was asking for what reasons do students receive a new student car number?
Students get a new career number when they apply for admission again. So if they stop out and they come back, they will get a new career number. We also see it when a student applies for fall and gets admitted, and then they decide they want to start earlier. I shouldn't have said that. I want to use spring as my example. A student applies for spring, gets admitted, and that's career number 0, and then they decide they want to start in the prior fall. They get admitted again, and the fall will end up being career number 1, even though it's earlier. We do cleanup before the 21st day to manage those multiples and make sure there's only one, because sometimes they get admitted to 2 different majors on 2 different campuses, and we have to determine which one they want to stay in. The other way for undergraduates is for concurrent degrees. At ASU, if a student gets concurrent degrees, which means 2 degrees awarded at the same time on the same date, they are 2 diplomas. They are not 1 diploma with 2 majors, and that's important for other things that I don't have time to get into. But in order to do that, to give them 2 diplomas, we have to give them 2 career numbers, even if they're in the same college. There's lots of other reasons why students end up with multiple career numbers, but those are the most common reasons.
Okay, thank you for that. And I did want to let you know we've got about 10 minutes here, so.
All right. I am going to speed through this. Here is a student's record showing their NRC as it changed over time, and you can see their enrollment status for all those terms. This student was new in the summer of 2013. They graduated, and then they were new again in fall of 2019 when they got admitted to a master's program. We won't have time to get into effective dates, but I wanted to just point out that academic advisors can change students' majors for undergraduates. And when they do, they decide if it needs to be backdated to the term start or not. They do this based on whether the student still needs to register for classes that have prereqs restricted to that major. If the student can't register for the classes unless they're in the major, then they backdate it to the term start. There are also implications for tuition and fee calculation. If they backdate it to the term start, then the student's tuition and fees for that term will be charged based on that major. So they decide when they are making the update whether it needs to be backdated or not. If they backdate it, then student profile will pick up that major for the term. We will also use it for enrollment tracking reporting and for the 21st day. If they don't backdate it, we don't use it. It's not effective until the next term. Here I wanted to display some examples of students with multiple records. Some of them have multiple career numbers. Some of them have multiple plan codes on the same career number. And we have these primary record flags. We have a flag for the primary career, the primary program, and the primary plan. And for each student in every term, we calculate the primary record whenever it is the primary career program and plan. So whenever the other three fields are primary, then the primary record flag is Y. You can use this primary record flag in queries when you need just one record per student and you don't need to know what the other non-primary records are. It collapses it to one record per student and you can still get their major and enrollment status. But these are examples of all the different career numbers that students have for concurrent degrees. This is the residency. The values are either res or no res. Student profile by term is the table I was describing that has one record per student per term. This is where we get the state funded flag and how many state funded units that student had in the term. We also have a Barrett honors flag. It's just yes, no, if they're a Barrett student that term or not. We have an athlete flag. We also have a yes, no flag that tells you if the student has any service indicators that block enrollment. It's just an enrollment hold flag. And last, this table has their academic standing. This example I'm showing you right now, the student started the term on probation. And in December, when grades are posted and we run repeat and then academic standing based on their grades this semester, they'll either be put on continuing probation again, they might be on good standing or they might be disqualified. And at that time, you'll see values populate in the EOT, which stands for end of term. Over on the left, you see the service indicator negative flag, which is a Y. That's the enrollment hold I was talking about, and the honors student flag and the athlete flag. This is also the table where you can see if the student was an exchange student or visiting scholar. It's the last field on the bottom right. The exchange student type. If they're not an exchange student or visiting scholar, it's blank. Last table is the student profile major current, and it has all of the program plan, subplan, and campus, but it's only as of today's date, not as of a term start. So for some reporting, this is more useful than going back to the term start if you need students who are in the major today. It does not include students that have graduated or been discontinued for other reasons, but it does include global launch. We did pull that data into this table. Because it's the current record, it's all effective data, there's no term-based data in here. Last, I wanted to at least show you the snapshots. These are the student profile snapshots that we use for enrollment tracking, point in time comparisons. These snapshots are taken daily, starting when registration starts. And these are the tables that are used to produce the data that's my Zoom background today. They are snapshots of the tables I just showed you, the student profile major by term and the student profile by term, as well as the class table, the student enroll table, and then the person table, which is where we get data including their citizenship and whether they're international or not. Okay, questions?
Yes, we've got a couple here. One more recently, we've got just a quick question of whether the PowerPoint for the presentation will be available afterward or just the YouTube video.
Yes, I'm not sure where the PowerPoint will go as far as the data conference, but I'm happy to send it to anyone otherwise.
Yeah, this is Lisa. You can send it to me, and I'm forwarding the slide decks to Erin so she can post them.
Great.
If anybody makes them available, she'll do that.
Thank you.
I did post the YouTube channel link in the chat for you if you don't have that already. And then also Rebecca was asking how is the Barrett flag updated? In Barrett, they use group codes and not the flag.
The flag is based on the student group codes. The student group codes that Barrett uses, I think there's 8 or 10 of them right now, are all used for several other system processes, critical processes, I would say, including enrollment requirements, also known as prereqs, and reserve capacities where seats are reserved for Barrett students. We use the same rules that the enrollment engine uses for those processes to populate this flag. That means it needs to be the student groups for Barrett. We put them in an entity group in PeopleSoft. And then we use the same effective dating logic that the enrollment engine uses, which means a student can be in the student group effective today. If it's not active as of the fall term start, which was August 20th, then they're not eligible for a fall 20 class reserved for Barrett students. If Barrett backdates it to August 20th, which they do all the time, then that student is eligible for the class. And because they backdated it, that also is used in our flag in this table. So this table is a very simplified look using the same student groups that are used for enrollment requirements, which reserve seats. And it basically means if they're Barrett for that term, because they can be in Barrett one term and not the next, and vice versa. Well, thank you everyone for joining me today. Thank you, Lisa and Danny.
Thank you. This is very informative. Bye.
Bye.
I know.